Hi there, good to see you again. This video is going to cover the WeightShift project that you'll be doing this week. There's a lot that goes into this. It's not just the same thing as, let's say, just breaking down two movements, or basically two keys. There's a lot more going on here because we're going to be going into, obviously, shifting weight, makes sense, but also actually taking a step. Yes, maybe this is your first step of many, but we're going to start off with a pose. In this video, of course, you'll want to create your own pose. You'll see that you will have a prop that will already be parented to the hand. So if you want, you can kind of have that mug there. If you don't want to use that, you can honestly just grab the geometry and delete it if you wanted to. If you don't want a prop, you can just have your character standing and then shift their weight. Of course, we're not just shifting weight here with the feet sort of cemented to the ground. We're actually going to do a slight pivot to the character. So to make that work, what I would suggest doing is thinking of a way that you can tell a story with your weight shift. So instead of having the character literally just, go from one position to another and like sort of just take a step, you can actually think of maybe a character has somebody barking at them or, calls to them or something. They kind of lift their eyes from wherever they are and then make the turn. So have them observe, then react. Action, then reaction. That's the idea. And that's true not just for this. Hopefully you'll start to see that's really a trend in all of acting and all of animation. So, obviously everything you're learning here is not like, this is how to shift the weight of a character. It's not just that. It's building on the principles of, here's a key, here's another key. How do we get from point A to point B? So in this case, we are telling a story. That's fundamentally what we're doing, and obviously we're going to integrate all of these things that we've been building on. So the take and all of that stuff from 3D Animation 1. So without further ado, let's dive in here. Right now, I just have a very basic pose with just character looking down at their coffee, maybe starting their day. And in this case, I would like to start this off with a character that maybe somebody goes, hey, did you see this thing over here? And, the character maybe looks up from the cup of coffee and then maybe takes a step, probably over in this direction is the way I'll do it. So I took the liberty, by the way, of the teeth controls and the nose controls. I put them over here in their own little layer, so if you wanted those on. I personally like them being off when I don't need them. It just makes it easier for me to see the face. So those are just little things that you're going to find will work or not work for you as you go along. There's so many different rigs out there, and some have controls that are all over the face. And, well, sometimes you don't want all of them at the same time. Maybe you do want them to be there, just not right now. So sometimes I'll turn these over over there, just throw them aside. So when you're posing this stuff out, by the way, you may not know exactly how much time certain actions should take. So here's what I would suggest. Start off doing things on like 4s or 6s or 8s, something thereabouts. That way you can kind of say, well, I don't exactly know how long this should take, but, as long as you have a buffer of about 8 frames, it's going to be in the ballpark. And you can kind of shift things around as needed from there. So I'm just going to go out like, we'll do this on 8s this way. So first thing, obviously, I want to do is have the character look up from their mug. In a way, you could actually look at this as a take, believe it or not. So instead of having the character looking straight down, I might have the character look up this way, right? So, not just that, you might actually even, let's say, take the torso here and, add a little bit of a rearing back, maybe drop the mug slightly, and the wrist a little bit. Maybe take the root control there and shift the weight a little bit. Maybe slightly back. You don't want to go too far with there, but in this arm, don't forget, other parts of the body there. So this is going to be a pretty subtle pose. This is kind of an anticipation, really. So obviously, facial expression, we'll get into that. If the character is, having something brought to their attention, you'll probably want to pull the eyes a little bit further out and up. Of course, that's pretty hilarious, but we'll raise the eyes so they're kind of looking out in the distance a little bit. Maybe somebody says, "Hey, did you see this thing?" So they're like, "What?" So you have to kind of lift the eyes that way, and then the brow. You'll probably want to lift this up, but even adding a little bit of that sort of brow curl can be pretty nice. So, and a nice thing as well is any chance you can, and you have to know the situations obviously, but I would say this is a pretty nice situation where we get some kind of like mouth open. This is sort of a opposing action. So the brow and the eyes kind of move upward and the mouth opens. So the mouth is traveling down, the brows and eyes are traveling up, and that gives you that nice opposing action. So if you jump between these two keys, you get this kind of more organic feel. That's the idea anyway. And I mean, even with the shoulders, like as you get in here, maybe make sure you key everything. But as you jump from here to there, you might want to lower that shoulder. And if you do lower a shoulder, then you're going to probably want to lower the arm a little bit. Same with this one. So jump between. By the way, to do this, if you've forgotten, it's greater than less than symbols on your keyboard, or comma period, allows you to jump between your keys. We'll probably be using that a little bit more as we go along. So drop the shoulder. Now, by the way, what are the shoulders for? They're not just like, oh, well, this is what makes your arm, do its thing, and the shoulder is obviously an important joint. There's a lot of emotion involved in the shoulder, and actually, when you're changing expressions, your shoulders are a big part of that, actually. So if your character is kind of looking up, going, what? Your shoulders might roll back slightly. And like, if you're more tense, then maybe your shoulders might bunch up, and they might kind of do something more like this if the character's more apprehensive. But in this case, we're kind of relaxed, and as we raise, again, this is sort of an opposing action. The head and everything is straightening up, but the shoulders kind of travel down. So by doing that, makes it feel, again, a little bit more organic that way. So we'll see how this kind of plays out. Grab the whole thing, key it. So you can kind of go from this pose to that pose. So they're like, what? You don't have to have the character literally looking at the camera. You can establish what you want your shot to look like. But, as long as you're kind of rotating around your character and thinking about what you're doing, you should be okay. So we kind of have something like that. Is this going to get you a job somewhere? Maybe not yet, but it is a good start. It is a good start. So what's the next step? Well, if you're going to look up at somebody, you can't just go from that pose right to the next thing. You have to kind of think about how, when you create an action, that action may sit for a moment. It may pause. So if you're looking up at somebody, you're not just going to look at them for a single frame and then move on. You have to kind of look up at them, register, what are they saying, and then go do the action. So I'm going to actually put a hold here. And we'll just go out 8 frames. So I'll just grab everything here. Make sure you hit your all button. Middle mouse out. Hit the S key. So that's going to hold. We're going to look up and we're going to hold for a moment. And we can then have the character's eyes dart to where we want them to go. So you want your eyes to look in the direction that you're about to go, so that basically you're kind of leading the action. You're almost telling the audience, you're broadcasting to the audience, hey, my character is going to go this way, where they're looking, basically, because that's how we work, right? So if you're holding for this amount of time, if you're going to do an eye dart, well, your eye dart is actually going to occur over a single frame. So you might even just do something like this. You might do something like that. You might look up, depending. So, if you want to kind of keep it so it's just out in the distance like that, that's fine. We'll just hit that. So it's just going to be a single eye dart like that. And then you probably will want to hold that for a chunk of time. So if we wanted to, we could just hold this for, 7 frames, I guess, because this is really just a single frame dart anyway. in keeping with, you know, the 8 frames that we're doing here. So the main action still is from 40 to 48. So we go there. And then, yes, we have to make our character move. We have to have them lean and shift their weight onto basically where they're going to end up next. So how do we go about doing that? Well, you have to kind of tell our character here where you want that back foot to shift. So in this case, you're going to want to bring your foot back in a position where you want your character to, well, plant that foot. So in this case, you could probably go with the character's toe being in a sort of backwards position. Now, this is not to say that you just leave everything else the way it is. You're going to have to kind of counter-rotate and shift the weight of your character over this way. So you're kind of, while your one foot is planting itself back, the other parts of your body are anticipating this, so they're kind of building up some energy before they change direction. So that's really what we're doing here. So with this arm, I might start this action and kind of lift that. Maybe the pull vector over here on that arm. Might want to bring that back behind the character a little bit. So really, this is a character that's about to step backwards a little bit and turn toward this vicinity, because of course, you know, that's where they're looking. So with this leg, you know, is that far enough back? You know, maybe you want to place it back behind you, but even still, you got to grab your root, and you've got to think about how you're shifting your weight. So, you know, are you going to dip the character here and shift your weight this way over your supporting leg first? And you'll probably dip a little bit. Maybe we'll do something like that. Now, the torso, okay? If we're going to do this, you'll probably end up leaning the opposite direction a little bit. Maybe even tilting your head and neck. And you can start the head turning before the body. So if you maybe tilt the chin up, your arm here, you might drop that. You might even rotate your mug out. Don't forget that you have coffee in there or whatever. So you're probably going to want to keep this pretty, I don't know, stable. Don't just start like moving it over here and going, oh, I'm just going to drop my arm. Like, you have to keep in mind that that's, you know, act it out really is probably one of the best things you can do. So might bring that elbow out. So we'll key that. And look, this leg here is locked out. It's broken. We'll probably end up going back and fixing some of that. But right now, I'm just going to kind of keep it as it is, because we're going to see what we can get away with on the next pose. So we'll leave that. We're going to move out to 56 and just throw a key there, just copy it, and then you can pose this out. So what would be next? Well, you've got to shift your weight. So once you've planted that foot there, now is the time to put your weight over that new position and turn your character. So, you know, lean into it perhaps, because you're going to put your weight onto that leg. You're shifting all of your weight over it, and then you will basically, once you place all your weight onto this leg, you'll then straighten your character up and plant this foot over here. So it's 1 foot moves at a time. If you move both of your feet at the same time, you've found some sort of hover technology. You can't do that. You can't move both feet simultaneously unless you're slipping and falling or something. So 1 foot has to be supporting you at any given time. You have to think about which foot that happens to be. So in this case, we're shifting our weight over this left foot here. Don't forget about your mug. Bring it along. You can drag it behind. It's okay. Maybe you'd like to keep it so the wrist maybe dragging the mug a little bit. Maybe even dipping slightly. So, you know, if you want to, you can scrub through and see how that's going to flow. Um, Sometimes that's going to bog you down because you might be looking at like 1,000 things simultaneously. Usually it's a good idea to just look at the poses themselves. And what I mean by that is you can hit your all button and jump from pose to pose. So you can see here we go from this to the look up to the hold. That's what these two keys are. To the eye dart. There. It darts over. And then the character kind of builds up their lean here. And of course, you know, I'm not happy with that pose. I think we can do much, much better. So I'm going to maybe lean this way. Maybe we'll tilt the character and start that lean on that. So find ways to strengthen your poses. So key that. And then we dip into this, and of course we go into a stand. So I'll just kind of do that real quick. So I hope, you know, as you're watching this, I hope you're kind of going, okay, that kind of makes sense. You know, the process is just kind of, this is a straight ahead method, by the way. I'm not using a sort of, it is sort of pose to pose in so far as, you know, I'm creating core poses, right? But in this method, I'm kind of feeling out, like, how do I want this character to flow from point A to point B? So when doing a lot of physicality, I find that this method works pretty well. Some people work differently, obviously, and you have to kind of find what works best for your mindset. Because obviously, you know, what works for me doesn't necessarily work for other people, and that's just, you know, that's artistry, right? Like, if the way I hold a pencil, you'd be like, what? That's crazy. I would hold it this way. It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. So the more you animate, the more this stuff is going to start to feel natural to you, and you'll go, oh, actually, I kind of gravitate more toward this or that. So as I move the character here, I just hope that you're kind of going, okay, yeah, I can see at least the thought process. We're just sculpting this to see, you know, how we want the character to finally, you know, hit their final pose here. So with this foot, you saw me like put it in that position, but it's not quite, you know, where we want it. I've been using rotation, so if I jump between these two, you know, when we planted this foot here and then it goes down like that, this is not exactly where we want it. So even if I were to bring this up and we go back and forth, that foot's sliding because this knee and this leg is kind of locked out. So if you needed to kind of rotate the hips slightly to alleviate some of that, by all means do that. If you needed to rotate this and bring this up so the knee is not locked out, find that place and then rotate accordingly, and that works perfectly fine. So you don't want the knees to be completely locked out. Basically, the reason behind that is Maya doesn't like when any joints are really locked out, because when you go from complete lockout to any bend whatsoever, turns out that's like going from 0 to 1, and that's an infinite difference. There's an infinite difference between 0 and 1. So, because you're going from literally nothing to something, and Maya doesn't quite know how to ease into some bend in the knee. So you'll notice if you go from a complete lockout of a limb, like if you see, and just so you know what that looks like, a lockout is like if you do this and you get this ballerina looking thing. Basically, the knee has zero bend. It's almost hyperextended. When it hits that, it will pop the knee. The knee will go from that to, it'll have this weird, huge change, and you'll start scratching your head going, like, what's causing that? And it's because your knee is locked out. So with something like this, I would avoid the foot being, or the knee rather, being locked out. So having some slight bend there is probably a good idea. But of course, you'll notice as we go from 48 over here that the foot's kind of swimming around. I'm not liking that at all. So we have to kind of fix that. So here's what you do. Go to 48, middle mouse on to 56, hit the S key, and that's going to make that foot absolutely stay exactly where it is. 0 out, rotate Z, 0 out, rotate X, take the foot, rotate it, or translate it rather, all the way down so it's on the ground. Now, if you key that, it's still going to have an issue. It's going to slide back this way, okay? So here's what you do. Find where the toe is on this frame and see where the toe is there. What you want to do, your task, is bring the control, the foot control here, so that it meets the toe on this pose at 48. So we'll go here. And I'm just going to move this over. And my job is to eyeball and get this foot to kind of plant in such a way that it feels pretty natural. So scrub through, boom. See how that kind of flows a little better? Now even then, you can still use a little bit of rock. Like maybe you want the foot to land slightly this way. So it has some little bit of a tilt to it. And then middle mouse out to 64, of course, because that was where the foot will be fully planted on the ground. So you'll zero that out like that. And you get this kind of bloop, plants just like that. I don't know why I made that sound, but we'll just kind of move on. So as that foot plants, that's what we're looking for. Now, you'll step over there. That means that we've got a decent infrastructure over here, but of course, how do we get from here to there? Our final pose. Well, you're going to want to, and it's not really the final pose, but we'll kind of just pretend that it is. Try to design what you want your character to settle into, okay? Because we'll go ahead and maybe add an extra pose, but I am going to tilt the character such that the weight will be basically over this leg. Don't go too far forward, of course, on your foot. You want that to feel like it's just over the leg there. You might pull this up slightly. And this foot is going to come forward. So let's go ahead and do that. And if you go close, like if you bring this foot like really close in, you might even be able to make a second step, like a micro step with this foot. So maybe we'll do that, maybe we won't. We'll see. Feel it out here. So why, by the way, why is the hip dipped on this side and pushed up on this side? Well, the reason is because the weight is more distributed on this leg, meaning that it is pushing up on this hip joint, which causes this hip to be a little bit higher than this side. And when you do that, you can actually create some nice contrapposto by saying this hip is a little higher, so guess what? The torso, you can bend the other way, and you get a nice kind of angular, the shoulders are down this way, the hips are up this way, and you get this nice counter rotation. So that's the idea. And what about our mug? Very, very important. Bring it over. And don't forget the pull vector, because you leave that behind, bad things happen. And I mean, with this arm, you can keep it down at the side. You can, there's so many different things you can do with this. I mean, if you wanted to, you could like put the hand on the hip, or put the hand on the hip, like, power stance kind of thing. You can do this sort of thing where the hand is that way. This is a very Disney thing, by the way. This is like classic pose there. But so let's key that. And with the eyes, of course, we're going to want to continue this. So wait a minute. The eyes start to turn here. And by the way, we're darting this way, but once you start turning, the character's eyes might end up way over here. So just so you know. We'll do that. So now character up this way. And, do we want our character to have their head tilted that way? Maybe we want the character's head like this, or like this, Key it when you're happy with it. So, ta-da, boom, okay. We hit that pose. Now, if you hit this pose and you're like, yeah, that's all right, but maybe I do want that extra. So you could hit this pose and do another micro step. Now, if you want to do the micro step, because we'll hit this right away, it is possible to hit this pose and say, well, I actually want to settle in to this one, which means this arm might come this way. And there might be a little bit of a settle in here. Those back controls might straighten up slightly. And we'll just do a very, very small. And when I say very small, I mean this is like a micro step, okay? This is a step that would be only like this far. Maybe even like a little bit backwards, but like, I don't know, not even that. We'll just kind of do that kind of a step, maybe a little bit more. So more of an even weight distribution across both legs. So you'll kind of hit this pose and then take that micro step that way. And really, we can probably get away with more of a lean. So we'll see what we can do. And, oh, I'm not on the right frame, but that's okay. I'll just middle mouse over 72. Get rid of that guy. I do that all the time. You probably have at least once by now. So here's the thing. With this foot step, this is not going to take 8 frames. Like, I just know, because it's a micro step, it's really only going to be like 4 to 6 frames or something to complete the action. So what you might want to do here is go with like 4, so it just kind of goes like that. But make sure you grab the whole character when you do that. So I'll make this about 4 frames. And as you do that, you might even create a breakdown where, like right here, you might lift this foot and just tilt that down. So it kind of gets this like plant like that. Boom. And that can be your final pose. So you can hit this and maybe go 4 frames or 6 frames after and just kind of settle in. So, with the rest of the body, you could grab everything but this foot and you could say, well, I actually want to steal this in between right here, just before this extreme. And I just want to steal that and put it there. So it goes like this and then back slightly. And it's just going to settle you in a little bit. Now, I want you to understand that as we've gone through this, and I'm kind of doing it very quickly and roughly, but it's the process that's the most important part, right? So you can add all this stuff, and there's tons of stuff going on here with the posing, and the last like 20% of touching up these poses is actually what takes you 80% of the time. So I'll save that for another video, but I really want you to understand from this one just how to get that weight shift posed out, because basically once you have this infrastructure, you can then say, okay, well, how do I actually finish this off? Because there's so much more that you can do with this, with that eye dart, with the facial expressions as you go. There's just so much to be done here. So I'll leave this video and see you in the next one, where we'll kind of explore what goes into kind of breaking some of this stuff down. Because you might be like, oh, well, it's kind of done, right? Like, we're on the way. This is not even halfway done. How about that? It's kind of crazy. But really, like, when it comes to animation, you can have the base keys, and that's fine. But I would say this isn't that well timed, and it's definitely not polished by any stretch of the imagination. Like, if you're watching things like this arc on this arm, like, could be definitely better. It's kind of from like here to there, it's pretty linear. It's going almost straight there. This other arm I'm not quite happy with either. So we'll explore how to touch that stuff up. Of course, the facial expressions as well. Build that into these poses. Smooth out maybe some of the ending there. Yeah, I'll see you on the other side. Thanks for watching.